Russia has been attacking Ukraine overtly since 2014, but even before that has sought to influence politics in Ukraine through propaganda and information warfare, corrupt agents and assets. But this war turned into a full-scale invasion in February 2022. Of course, Western technology and weaponry has played an important role in helping Ukraine to resist, but also homegrown technology, techniques of resistance, and strong self-organizing initiatives have all helped turn the tide from being an underdog to become a capable and formidable opponent. Today, I am speaking with Denys Gurak, an innovator and technology entrepreneur, about how Ukraine is becoming a tech powerhouse and how this is contributing to their resistance and victory. Denys Gurak has worked with both industrial juggernauts and small technology ventures. His specializations are in biotech, aerospace, and security industries. Denys is Chief Executive Officer of A.D.A.M, Advanced Development of Additive Manufacturing. He has a passion for developing world-changing tech ventures, but is also highly active in several think tanks and NGOs. He is also interested in geopolitics and accomplished at public speaking. Denys, I'm really pleased to welcome you to the channel.
Thank you, Jonathan, for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
It's an absolute privilege. And I'd like to start off really with the technology venture that you are involved in at the moment. I know it's quite a complex subject, but could you talk a little bit about what you're doing, the origins of it, and how you're bringing that technology to market?
Yeah, it's a bit of a complex subject if you go into technical details, but if to try to explain it in layman's terms, we want to do something like Westworld, but in practice, in actual clinical practice. So imagine someone has an injury and they need a transplant of their tissue. Currently, the supply chain of human tissues, the whole logistics of transplantation is really outdated. It happens like it used to happen 50 years ago. So what we want to do, we are working on establishing a global infrastructure of printing of human tissues on demand in hospitals. So basically, we're a platform for cloud manufacturing of human tissues. We're starting with bones, with bone implants. We're starting with that because technology for that exists, and it's quite easy to prove the model, how we want to do it with bones and access the market much faster than with, let's say, organ 3D printing. But ultimate idea is to be able to print human organs on site. So basically, think of it as like car shop-like infrastructure for human body. Yeah. And
so we're going from transplants, grafts, and what is basically a very mechanical kind of process that requires a donor human, and you're looking at industrializing that whole process. And does that remove the requirement for donors? Do you develop these tissues based on, say, sort of samples or genetic material from the patient themselves?
Yeah, that's one of the layers. So you're absolutely right that this is an approach of industrial manufacturing of human tissue. So what we have a proprietary technology developed by Ukrainian engineers in 3D printing of bioactive bone implants. So they mimic the structure of the bone and have bioresorbability and biodegradability features. What it means is that they are dissolved over time and bone grows instead of it, just replaces it. The same principle can be used for soft tissues, and there will be next in our pipeline. So human skin, blood vessels, heart valves, that is also possible within the nearest future, let's say within 5 years. They are the similar concepts and similar things are on the market currently. So we're not reinventing the wheel. What we're doing is we're repacking it in a way that it's scalable and makes sense, because organ 3D printing has been in place for quite some time. Actually, the first 3D printed organ was done in 1999, and that was a human bladder, and the patient still walks with it. But the problem is non-scalability and all that comes with this. Innovation makes sense when it's getting you a cheaper and better product. If it's a more expensive and longer delivery product, then it doesn't make sense. So what we're doing, we're going to shrink time for delivery of implants, of orthopedic implants, from a few weeks to literally 1 day, and we're going to shrink the costs depending on the size and shape of the implant from 3 to 10 times. Those are figures for U.S. market, which we are planning to tap as a priority market.
And is this very much a sort of Ukrainian innovation, and most of your development team Ukrainian? And of course, the obvious question is, how has the war affected, where they're based and how they work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fully Ukrainian innovation. It is an engineering team with aerospace and medical backgrounds that most of which lives in Odessa. So we have 8 engineers in Odessa currently. We've been working on this for 3 years now. It all started with a ceramic 3D printer, which they've assembled for actually aerospace application. And during a Techstars accelerator in US, the medical application was discovered. And because of my background in medical regulation in Ukraine, I used to work for Ukrainian FDA and had the adaptation of worldwide standards into Ukrainian law. So that's how it all came together. But going back to your question, team is fine. Fortunately, everyone's safe. Everyone is like any other Ukrainians. They're involved in helping our army. So few folks are volunteering because we have surgeons in the team. They're obviously working with wounded soldiers. And well, from the company point of view and from the market entry point of view, we're going to first do the proof of concept in Ukraine, because we initially ideated that technology is applicable to wounded soldiers and civilians. Because of the blast, polytrauma is very common. So a lot of small pieces damage human skeleton. And after they're removed, there are bone voids that need to be filled. And that's how our technology plays in really well. You could print any size, shape of the implant, and it's not metal. You don't need to do reoperation and imagine, 10, 20 pieces that one patient can have. So we are happy really that we could contribute, and we will contribute. I can go into more details how that's going to happen in Ukraine, but we see our mission in that as well.
And if you were rolling out that sort of beta process or that test process in, say, the US, would it be slower due to regulatory requirements, or is it really driven by that current need in Ukraine for the support of wounded soldiers? Is it more of a humanitarian decision that's driving that?
Both, yeah. So, of course, there is a need in Ukraine, but what war situation brings is the ability to test out new technologies, which otherwise would have taken more time. So that applies not only to weapons, but also to healthcare technologies. And it's not that, so in our case, I'm not a regulator and we haven't received the regulatory approval in US yet, but as an expert, I can definitely say it's not more risky and it's a better patient outcome than what is existing on the market. It's just that when there is war, doctors are, more prone to use innovative methods. So, and that will itself accelerate, of course, the entry to the market for us globally. But what we know is that no one would be able to do this, what we can do on a scale that we are able to do and at the cost that we're able to do. Of course, we're going to provide it for Ukraine at the minimum costs possible. Of course, we're not planning to make money on it.
And of course, in normal times, I guess the surgeons wouldn't be seeing the extreme nature of injuries they're seeing at the moment, and of course they wouldn't be seeing them in the sort of quantities. So in effect, I mean, this technology is at the right place, right time to deal with a horrific scale of injury.
Yeah, for sure. But you would be surprised how many orthopedic surgeries are happening every day in the world. So just for to drive your imagination, the U.S. has 30,000 orthopedic surgeons that are doing surgeries almost. Each of them was doing surgeries basically every day, at least one. Yeah. And that's that. There are multiple reasons for that such as aging population, etc. But if you want to go into that detail, happy to. But of course, yeah, our priority is to build the system for Ukraine, help as much people as we can. Yeah, as I said, we believe it's our mission. You know, as any Ukrainian, we need to do everything possible to make this end with the least, damage possible.
And you're based in Odessa at the moment, but I understand that you're working on a new sort of hub in Lviv. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. So we have a distributed team like most of the startups. So we have a team partially on the East Coast in the US. That's where I am. And our engineering team is in Odessa, but the hub where we're planning to install the first printers and treat first patients will be in Lviv. It's called there are actually two of them. We're still working out the details, which one's going to be first. One is called Superhuman Center, and another one is called the Unbroken Center. So because of the need for rehabilitation, a part of which is orthopedics, there are multiple initiatives now in Ukraine to treat the wounded, and those are thousands or tens of thousands of people. So
and how supportive is the government? And do you have initiatives or coordination with the government? And are they open to the kind of technological innovation that you're offering?
Yes, indeed. The government, actually, it was the government that initiated us participating in these projects. It was the Ministry of Healthcare. The good thing about Ukrainian government now, and I think everyone's seen that, especially now during the war, is that there are a lot of young blood, say it like that, really understanding that innovation helps with achieving better results, both on the battlefield and in other spheres. So we're really happy that me personally, I'm very happy that Ukraine is helping companies like ours to grow. It's very important, as part of Ukraine's global brand strategy, I would say, which was and still is a big passion of mine personally. I'm a big believer in Ukrainian technology, and actually the very idea of doing the startup in the first place was to show that Ukraine can give value to the world through quality of its engineering, actually, and to show that such case is possible, because I believe it will have a big impact. And I'm a very big believer in Ukrainian technology and engineering capability. I always like to say that we can engineer Death Star if you want. And yeah, it's just that no one asked.
And I think that's something which I only became aware of recently, and that's that Ukraine had incredibly high-tech engineering infrastructure during the Soviet Union, didn't it? I mean, a lot of the advanced missile systems, a lot of the advanced weaponry, and of course the aviation technology. A lot of that took place through the Soviet period, and that's kind of carried through and sort of blossomed, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I used to work in defense industry in Ukraine, started working there just after the initial phase of the war with Russia started, or actually before that, in summer 2014, just before the first hot phase in August. So historically, Ukraine has been the brains of Soviet Union, and especially in R&D. So how was structured? So in '91, apart from 1 million army, we had 1 million people working in defense industry, 800 facilities back then. All that also because, well, first because of the brains, secondly because Ukraine was at the western flank of Soviet Union, so a lot of capabilities were here. So those were mostly research capabilities and maintenance capabilities. Because if the war with NATO happened, it would happen, here. So on the backlines, you need, factories that can repair tanks quickly, just as an example. But most of the final assembly of fighter jets, a lot of the aircraft, happened in Russia. It was done on purpose, not to concentrate too much capability in Ukraine, but still, things like intercontinental ballistic missiles, turbines, gas turbines for helicopters, planes, gas turbines for ships and for gas transport system, military transport aircraft, tanks, a lot of other things. Actually, the only Soviet aviation carriers were designed and manufactured in Ukraine. So I do think that we actually have much bigger leverage on Russia in terms of if we would, and that's one of the reasons why Russia would have attacked inevitably, because their defense industry cannot function without our capabilities, such as I named, for gas turbines, for transport aircraft Antonov, for ICBMs in Dnipro. So, and for some reason, defense technologies function in a way that it's super hard to replicate. So, for instance, Gazprom wanted to replicate a facility located in Mykolaiv called Zorya Mashprojekt. So this facility manufactures 30 megawatt turbines, like a range of turbines, but the highest one is 30 megawatt turbine, and those turbines are the main ones that are used in gas transportation system. They wanted to replicate the same facility. They calculated they would need 50 or billion or $100 billion to do that, and they would need to rehire virtually all that facility and all those engineers, because there's just no other place in the world where there are such engineers. And they figured that they cannot do it. And Ukraine does have huge capability, and I think that that's our value to the world, because I think engineering is, if anything can save the world, it's technology.
It's engineers, exactly. Well, I mean, Google would certainly agree with you, I think, there.
Yeah.
And that's another interesting extension, isn't it? Because if you go back to 2014, the sort of more digital technologies, communications industry, marketing, web stuff as well, and a whole host of communications expertise, that was fairly nascent, wasn't it, during the first Russian invasion? But that technology sector has grown incredibly rapidly in terms of size and sophistication, really over the last sort of eight years or so.
You mean in Ukraine or globally?
In Ukraine, yes, especially in Ukraine, yeah. Like outsourced IT services, telecommunications and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. What's more surprising is that IT services have grown year on year in the second quarter of 2022, year on year, like 23%. So still the industry keeps growing. And what's even cooler is that a lot of engineers from IT outsourcing companies are now starting to build their product companies. So you see Ukrainian startup industry thriving, like since, I don't know, the last few years, there was at least double-digit growth in the money raised by Ukrainian startups. You have now a lot of actually famous ones. Like my favorite example is Grammarly. 3 Ukrainian founders. It's a decacorn now. They were rated by Fortune or by Time last year as one of 100 most influential companies in the world. So, and those such examples will keep emerging. So, yeah, as you know, as a believer in this, I'm really happy to see this happening finally.
And the
And
Revolut,
Ukraine being
that's another one.
recognized. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Revolut is another one, you know, in revolutionizing the financial services sector. And I think the interesting thing about these is that they're not parochial, are they? They have big global ambitions straight from the start. You know, they don't see just Ukraine or Eastern Europe as their market. They see the entire world as their potential market.
Yeah, well, that's the main criterion for any startup. It has to be global and scalable. Otherwise, VCs won't invest in it. Yeah, and for Ukrainian startups, they all actually figured that US market is more preferable for them. So they are targeting. So Revolut is another example like of EU market, because in financial services, you know, it's a bit easier, but EU market is generally more fragmented than US market. So you have like 70% of startups ideating the product initially for US market and 30% for EU market as an initial target one.
And before our interview, you shared some fascinating articles as well that so revenue is growing, which is extraordinary, not only in times of war, but when the electricity supply is under threat, but also, interestingly, there are investment funds and the actual inward investment in Ukrainian tech and startups is almost undeterred by the war. That is growing as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the first few months after the invasion happened, startups were like on a certain pause because of the disruption, because of the relocation need. But it's amazing how resilient Ukrainian founders are, and I'm talking to a lot of my peers from other companies, and I'm seeing that everyone became even more motivated and more active in doing what they're doing. First of all, because of objective need. Secondly, because of just purely psychological reason that you cannot not continue your life. You cannot be thinking about the war 24/7, and you have to focus on delivering the result, and that's a very distinctive feature of Ukrainians. For some reason, during crisis, we are the best. We are very discoordinated during normal times, but when crisis hits,
in peaceful times, though, not so much. More chaotic, perhaps.
yeah. More chaotic for sure.
And of course, we've talked about sort of civilian technologies, but also since 2014. Ukrainian society has been forced to be resilient in terms of countering disinformation, in terms of developing technologies, both informational and military technologies, to basically survive against the onslaught of Russian hybrid warfare and, of course, physical warfare. So could you talk a little bit as well about sort of military and informational innovations that are being driven in Ukraine, because there's quite an active ecosystem, isn't there?
Yeah, and I was actually very much involved in building out that ecosystem when I worked for Ukrainian defense industry. So what happened is that in 2014, apart from NATO advisors that started coming and training military people, there was a strategic decision made in the West to start collaborating with defense industry, because in defense industry everyone knew what we just talked about, the power of R&D. So we started seeing a lot of just big contractors and various innovation agencies from various NATO countries coming and saying, hey guys, how we can work together. And because before 2014, the system was very much Soviet and very much dormant. So the system of any innovation was almost gone, because for 25 years, no one invested in it. But for some reason, all those engineers, the educational system kept producing the engineers. So what we did, we basically took the methodology of US Department of Defense, which was actually the methodology, underlying methodology for any startup development. So all the innovations methodologies came from there, all these lean startups, agile, etc. So it's all from there. So it all came from DARPA and the way how US decided to fight the Cold War, because it's a really efficient way to produce innovations. And what's good about that methodology actually is that those technologies make sense which could be replicated in civilian sphere. So like internet or like GPS or like artificial intelligence, all that was created by DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Product Agency in US, with the view that it could be for the military application, but it could have been replicated and scaled in civilian sphere. So long story short, we started working on creating the same system in Ukraine. Because of the market size and the capacity of the government, to invest in defense tech, of course, it hasn't become as big as in the US. But because of the war situation, the pace of getting technology, so-called to market, for the ultimate use is much faster. And it's much more creative because you have different tactical, operational, and strategic situations every day. It's a very dynamic process, and the next domain warfare is actually being tested now in Ukraine, not with highly sophisticated, not only with highly sophisticated satellite communication technology, so-called C4 ISR domain, and that's reconnaissance, like reconnaissance plus concept, using UAV satellites, like a global tracking and intelligence system. So we could have used all that if we were US, but we have to actually have the same result with what we have available now. So it's an interesting mix, and how it's an interesting process that actually shows Ukrainian creativity again in critical times. Because so just as an example, two last applications that I saw. So everyone knows about these missile attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. So the government has developed an app which is called EPPO, which means there is air defense. Okay. So what it does is that through government portal A.D.A.M, you can verify your identity and access the system, where if you see a missile or a kamikaze UAV flying over you, you can take a picture, it automatically detects your location, sends the info to centralized processor, and that processor sends the info to air defense, and it could predict the trajectory where it's flying. So basically you're using decentralized system and people to help air defense to work better. And the second one was also applicable for air defense. It's not active to the full capacity yet, and it's not going to be a public project, but I know a few Ukrainian engineers that have developed an acoustic detection air defense system, which is based on really not primitive, but very simple civilian technology, but at the same time is very effective to detect missiles, and it was already tested out. So that's kind of the examples how it happens.
And that has echoes, doesn't it, of R&D in Britain during the Second World War, where a huge variety of sort of curious technologies were developed, including radar and others, but especially for D-Day, an incredibly diverse, innovative approach. a willingness to try all sorts of strange ideas which never would have been perhaps been considered in peacetime, and to also test a whole variety of ideas, some of which would fail, of course, but some which would succeed. And it's perhaps difficult going into that process to predict in advance which innovations will actually prove successful and which won't. So this war situation, it puts that whole testing process on steroids. It fast tracks something that would perhaps take many years in a peacetime situation.
Yeah, can I agree with you more, especially on this angle of similarity of British situation in the first years of Second World War. I think that's one of the reasons why Britain is so supportive of Ukraine now. You can even see memes on the internet, comparing Kiev bombings to London bombings. But yeah, definitely, and we should learn from that experience. And there are people that are learning as we speak. Of course, the properly trained military people do understand the benefits in terms of developing the new technologies, and that's how I think actually Ukraine will give value to the world, to NATO in future, because we would naturally be one of the most experienced, if not the most experienced, nation in developing new technologies. Hopefully, those would the ideology of that, after the Russia is defeated, the ideology of that would shift, towards more peaceful technologies, and sustainability, and just humanity trying to figure out how not to cease to exist and not how to destroy each other. Yeah.
And I think even when Russia, I mean, I'm a firm believer that Ukraine's going to win and it's going to expel Russia from the entirety of its territory. But even when the active hostilities are over, it's plausible, isn't it, that Russia will continue informational warfare, hybrid warfare, cyber warfare. It's not necessarily the case at all that Russia will become a benign state or a good neighbor. So hopefully the technology shift will, of course, move to more civilian uses. But this is where the development of, counter informational techniques and technologies come in. And of course, I formed the view that Ukraine has been a leader in this sphere for a number of years. Yes, we have Bellingcat, and we have several other, Western concepts that are doing very well. But actually, the methodologies to inoculate society against propaganda and develop those kind of technologies and methods, well, Ukraine is at the forefront of that effort, isn't it?
Yeah. I would say that the West has started to learn from Ukraine in that regard. I mean, for us, it was always obvious who Russians are. And we were literally screaming all the time, guys, look, this is a major, major risk. Like, how can you not see it? I don't know, especially after, so Russia started hybrid warfare, I would say, on the West back in the active phase of it back in 2008. So after the failed Bucharest summit of NATO, where Ukraine and Georgia weren't given, a clear yes to join. Then the invasion in Georgia happened. Then when invasion in Georgia happened, it was super clear that invasion in Ukraine will happen someday. So yeah, all those failures. Well, fortunately, we're seeing now the West realizing all that. Finally, but yeah, Ukraine can be a leader in this. We are literally witnessing this on a day-to-day basis. I don't know for how many years. It depends on how you count. You can count like even 400 years dating back to 17th century if you want. So it's yeah, for us, we know ins and outs. But if you're interested, I'm sure, like, as a professional, you're probably aware of the concept of disinformation, which is a KGB concept. There is a really cool book written by former head of Romanian intelligence who fled to US in 1984, I think. It's called Disinformation. It really opens your eyes on how Soviet Union and now Russia is of their methodology of worldwide propaganda, and it's really surprising how overarching it is.
I haven't read that one. I've seen a number of videos and read a number of other books by KGB defectors. Again, where they describe active measures and what's involved, and it's an extraordinary, I say quite clever in some instances, but it's an extraordinary cynical set of ideas and techniques, isn't it?
Well, yeah, there is this whole other world, which is an intelligence world, which functions mostly without emotion, with pure cynical calculation. It all depends, on the ultimate aim, which you believe in, whether you believe in autocracy or democracy. So for them, they do believe in what they're doing for some reason. I have no idea how they came up with that, why they think it makes sense at all. But that's that's what they're doing. Anyway, check out this book.
I'll definitely check that out. I mean, I know we're approaching the end, but one question I also wanted to ask is this key infrastructure that the technological innovations you're describing and the technological industries. Now, of course, I don't know really how serious it is, but of course, Moscow did make an attempt to kickstart its own mini version of Silicon Valley in Skolkovo, which, you can definitely deride that. It hasn't been particularly successful. But what I wanted to ask is, in a state that does not have a independent judiciary, that does not have an evolution of civil society like Ukraine has developed, and I know the judicial reforms, whereas they're not perfect, they are proceeding and creating the foundation that is required for technological innovation. But also there has been corruption, but of course that's also being tackled. I mean, how important is it, this judicial reform and tackling corruption, to create a stable foundation for technological innovation? And if we point the finger at Russia, is their technological revolution unlikely to happen because of the lack of these things?
Definitely. Well, my initial expertise is law, actually. So I graduated first as a lawyer. So I definitely understand the importance of proper judicial system. For startups themselves, it doesn't apply that much. Why? Because, again, they're all the startups are global. They're usually registered in an investor-friendly jurisdiction. So the startups that are going to US are usually registered in Delaware, because the courts in Delaware are super favorable to investors, and you can get an injunctive relief or any court order really fast, like within a matter of days. Of course, the development of the judicial system on the ground, like in Ukraine, is the main factor that holds, proper Ukrainian development. But now, hopefully, with the EU candidacy nomination and with everything that is going on geopolitically, the reform will happen faster and will be more efficient than it would have been otherwise. I do believe it will happen. I do believe Ukrainian nation will not be able to close its eyes, on corrupt people in the government trying to, hold us back, because and that's actually going back to our previous discussion. So the way of Russian active measures and influence on Ukraine has always been promoting corruption. That has been a strategy all the time. Everything that they need to do is to promote the same system as they have, either having useful idiots or just simple corrupt people that are becoming useful idiots, not knowingly. The key, if we won't be able, to win strategically in the long term if we don't make it happen.
And that's like kryptonite, isn't it, to technological Superman? It's basically the minute you have nepotism and corruption on that scale, which then percolates down through all layers of society, I mean, it's my belief that that kills off innovation. And that's maybe one of the reasons why China's tech revolution is starting to stall, because of political interference, nepotism, and promotion within a self-serving elite.
Yeah, again, it comes to the ultimate aim of, if to make it simple, it's how we define it now: democracy versus autocracy, right? But any technology that is developed should be developed, in my opinion, and these are not just nice words. How would you hear it about in Silicon Valley? It's like a trivial phrase now, changing the world by doing something. But it should, what's the point? That's the whole essence of humanity, is to change the world and make it better, and not to destroy it. And what's happening now is that, well, I don't see how the current geopolitical situation brings that result. What it could bring is the end of humanity faster, rather than just rather than us going to space and thriving in other dimensions or universes. Just yeah.
Absolutely. Well, my last question really is forward looking, and let's look forward to a scenario where Ukraine triumphs. What do you see as the sort of future developments of the tech sector, which is going to become the most vibrant areas, and what influence is tech and innovation going to have on the Ukrainian economy as the country reconstructs?
Definitely, there's going to be massive investment into infrastructure and all related sectors, so energy, enterprise automation, renewables, of course, because Russia did destroy a lot of renewable energy sources, and clean tech will be a major angle of the reconstruction. Then those be technologies that are naturally on a good level in Ukraine, such as agri-tech, biotech, defense tech, and of course everything related to maths, and so AI, cybersecurity, that will thrive. Material science, actually, Ukraine has been really strong in material science historically, and in various chemicals and chemical compounds and fuels. And all that is based on the scientific schools that Ukraine still has in maths, physics, chemistry, radio-electronics. So hopefully, so maybe I'm an optimist, but I do believe that we can make good of this war, at least in jump-starting our technological industry and our development, because we do need to catch up with the West in economical sense. I don't think I think we, in societal sense, we did catch up for sure. So yeah, we just need to balance that out with faster economic development.
And of course, people coming home will have a variety of experiences. Those who've been forced to live abroad, and it seems that there's going to be a potentially new cohesion as well. That Ukraine, despite a 30-year evolution with various bumps in the road, I've heard many people say that never before, as a nation, has Ukraine been so sort of united. And more moving in the same kind of direction as a people.
Yeah, for sure. And well, people will come back. You see people starting to come back already for various reasons, both bureaucratic and psychological. But I do believe most of the Ukrainians that fled will come back because it's our land. We all feel that we need to contribute, to restore what we had and make it better, and we do feel the sense of unity. It's really overarching sense. It's funny how it's happening, but that's something we'll never forget.
Well, Denys, I mean, this has been hugely insightful. I love talking to you about technology, and I really wish you the best in the innovations that you're bringing to an incredibly futuristic sector with A.D.A.M. Yeah, I watch your developments and successes with great interest.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you so much
for having me.